Settle into a comfortable position. Let your breathing slow in and out as we prepare to drift into the quiet world of the past. Tonight, we will journey to an island in the San Francisco Bay, windy, lonely, and surrounded by waters that seem to whisper warnings to anyone who gazes upon them. This is Alcatraz, a prison so notorious it became known simply as the Rock, a place where men were sent, not for ordinary crimes, but because they were considered too dangerous, too unmanageable for anywhere else. But beneath the legend of steel bars, guard towers, and crashing waves lies a quieter truth. A daily rhythm of the men who lived and worked there, the mysteries that cling to its history, and the story of the one escape that may have succeeded. Tonight, we will explore this story gently in 4 parts. First, you will step into the daily life of an inmate on Alcatraz in the 1960s. Second, we will follow the lives of 3 men, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers as they crafted their bold plan. Third, we will wander into the mysteries, the unanswered questions that linger even now. And last, we will compare the bleak existence of prisoners with the very different lives of the guards and their families who lived just a few steps away. Close your eyes if you wish, and let us begin. Imagine yourself awakening in the narrow cell of Alcatraz in the early 1960s. The space around you is small, hardly wider than the span of your arms. The walls are painted in muted shades of gray and pale green, their surfaces worn smooth by years of use. Above your head is a bare light fixture. Below, the concrete floor feels cool, even in the warmer months. A simple cut stretches along one wall, thin mattress, thin blanket. Nothing more. The sound that stirs you awake is not gentle. It is the metallic rattle of bars, the echo of footsteps along the tier, and the sharp clang of a guard's baton striking against the railing. The day begins at 6 in the morning. Whether you are ready or not, you rise from the cot. Perhaps you stretch a little, feeling the stiffness of another night on thin bedding. The air smells faintly of soap and disinfectant, with a lingering undertone of salt carried in from the sea. The corridors beyond your cell amplify every noise, the slam of a door, the murmur of voices, the cough of another prisoner. There is little privacy even here, in your own small space. You are always visible. The bars do not conceal you. They only remind you of separation. Soon, the first roll call begins. Guards walk the rows with practiced precision, eyes scanning every face, every bed, every corner. The sound of their keys jingling is constant, a reminder of authority and of doors that only they may open. After the roll call comes breakfast. The cells opened in a rhythm, clank, pause, clank, pause until each man steps out into the corridor. You move with the flow, part of a line, one after another, down the stairs, into the dining hall. The mess hall is one of the largest rooms on the island. Its high windows let in the gray light of morning, soft by fog drifting across the bay. The long rows of tables stretched neatly, each place set with the same simple tray. Food on Alcatraz was surprisingly considered decent for a prison. Hot oatmeal, eggs, toast, coffee, nothing extravagant, but enough to provide nourishment. For some men, it was far better than what they had eaten in poverty outside. And yet, meals here were never leisurely. They were regimented, quick, efficient, without chatter. You take your seat. The sound of cutlery clinking against metal trays fills the air. Guards stand watch from towers overlooking the hall, rifles at the ready. A single spark of violence could spread quickly here, so vigilance never wanes. Still, most mornings pass in silence, broken only by the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of boots. After breakfast, the men march in rows to their assigned work. Work was central to daily life on Alcatraz. Some were assigned to the laundry, scrubbing uniforms clean in great steaming vats. Others worked in the shops, repairing furniture or doing carpentry. A few tended the grounds, trimming plants or maintaining pads. Every task was purposeful, not just to keep the prison running, but to occupy restless minds and restless hands. In the laundry, the air is thick with heat and soap. Steam curls upward, dampening the walls and ceiling. The sound of machines churning fills the space, almost drowning out conversation. Shirts, trousers, linens, thousands of them passed through those hands. Each week, for the men in the workshops, the rhythm was different. The tap of hammers, the hum of saws, the scrape of sandpaper, each sound repeating, steady, until hours slipped by in monotony. And always there was the presence of the guards, watching, counting, reminding. Escape was unthinkable during the day. There were too many eyes, too many rules. The day stretched forward in its rigid pattern. Morning work, midday meal, afternoon work again, and then, finally, the return to this. When the men filed back into their cells, the clanging doors marked the closing of one chapter in the day. Each man in his own narrow space once more, with only a book, or perhaps a letter from home, to pass the hours until supper. The library of Alcatraz was considered well stocked for a prison. Thousands of volumes lined the shelves. History, novels, dictionaries, law books. Inmates could request titles and spend their quiet hours reading. For some, this became a lifeline, a way to keep the mind alive when the body was confined. Later came recreation. On certain days, men were permitted into the yard. The yard of Alcatraz looked out across the bay. Imagine standing there, feeling the wind whip against your face, and seeing beyond the chain-link fence the distant skyline of San Francisco. The city appeared close, yet impossibly far. Lights twinkled in the evening. Cars moved along roads, and ships passed by on the water. For a prisoner, it was a reminder of life continuing elsewhere, a life denied to them. Some played baseball, others walked in circles, talking quietly, or simply stood, staring at the waves. The gulls wheeled above, their cries sharp and free, indifferent to the men below. And then the bell would sound. Recreation ended. The yard emptied. Doors closed again. Evening brought supper, served much like breakfast and lunch, swift, efficient, quiet. Afterward, the men returned to their cells for the last time that day. The night hours stretched long. Some wrote letters, slowly, carefully, choosing each word. Some sketched or practiced music, with instruments occasionally permitted under supervision. Many simply lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady hum of the prisoners' generators and the faint rush of waves beyond the walls. And always, there was the ritual of lights out. At 9 o'clock sharp, the cell block darkened. The corridors fell into shadow, broken only by the dim glow of security lamps. You lie back on the cot once more, the thin blanket pulled up to your shoulders. The rhythm of footsteps continues in the corridor beyond, steady, unchanging. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn moans across the bay. The day has ended, and tomorrow the same cycle will begin again. I'll keep the calm, steady rhythm with gentle immersion, rich but soothing detail, and a quiet, factual tone. This section will carry us slowly through their lives before Alcatraz, their personalities, and finally the step-by-step crafting of the 1962 escape, always mindful to avoid sensation, keeping it reflective and steady. Segment 2. Biography and the escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. Imagine the men who would one day become the central figures in one of history's most enduring mysteries. Before they were prisoners on a forbidding island, they were children, sons, brothers. They were men shaped by circumstance, by poverty, and by choices that drew them steadily toward the life of crime. Let us begin with Frank Morris. Frank was born in 1926. His early life was marked not by stability but by drift. He grew up in foster homes, moving from place to place, never rooted, never quite secure. From an early age, he was noted for his intelligence. Tests suggested a high IQ, far above average. But intelligence alone does not anchor a person to the conventional path. Frank became known for escapes long before Alcatraz. His criminal record began early, involving narcotics, theft, and armed robbery. Each time he was caught, each time he was confined, he looked not only for survival inside but also for ways out. He slipped from reform schools, he slipped from prisons. Over and over he tested the limits. By the time he arrived at Alcatraz, he was already seasoned, already marked as someone who would not easily be contained. Now, picture John and Clarence Anglin. They were brothers, born into a large family of many children, raised in Georgia and then in Florida. Their family was poor, and the children grew up accustomed to hard labor, moving often as their parents sought work. In summer, the brothers would swim together in the rivers and lakes. They became strong swimmers, comfortable in water that others might find daunting. This detail later would matter a great deal. As young men, John and Clarence turned to bank robbery. They were not violent criminals in the sense of cruelty or bloodshed. Instead, they relied on speed, on the simple intimidation of a weapon, on the quick getaway. They were caught in the mid-1950s, sentenced, and began serving their time. Like Frank Morris, they, too, became known for attempting escape. One prison after another, they tried. Their persistence marked them as unsuitable for ordinary penitentiaries. And so, like Frank, they were sent to the Rock. By 1960, All three men, Frank, John, and Clarence, were held on Alcatraz. Their cells were close together in the main cell. This proximity would allow them to whisper, to plan, to share ideas. But planning an escape from Alcatraz was no simple matter. It had been tried before, and each time failure seemed inevitable. The waters were cold, the currents unforgiving, the guards constant. Still, something in these men did not accept the finality of confinement. It began, as so many great endeavors do, with observation. Frank Morris noticed that beneath the air vents at the back of the cells, the cement was crumbling, softened by years of salt and dampness. With patience, with persistence, these vents could become doorways. Night after night, hidden from guards by cardboard and paint, the men began to dig. They used spoons stolen from the mess hall, sharpened into crude tools. They used pieces of wood. The scraping was slow, painstaking. They muffled the sound with the cover of music played by another inmate on an accordion. Each night, a little more cement was chipped away. Each night, the vents widened. Behind the cells lay an unguarded utility corridor, narrow and dusty, filled with pipes and shadows. Reaching that corridor was like finding a secret passage within the prison itself. It connected their cells. It gave them a meeting place, away from eyes. But reaching the corridor was not enough. They needed a way out of the building entirely, and then a way off the island. Here, the ingenuity of the plan becomes clear. The men gathered materials wherever they could. Old raincoats, patched together with heat from steam pipes, became waterproof. More than 50 of these raincoats were stitched and sealed into a kind of raft, buoyant and strong. Pieces of wood served as paddles. They crafted dummy heads to leave in their beds, paper match faces, painted with flesh tones, topped with hair stolen from the prison barber shop. These heads, placed on the pillows, would pass the quick glance of a guard in the dim light of the night rounds. The preparation took months. Patient, quiet, deliberate, the kind of patience born only in confinement. And then, on the night of June 11th, 1962, the plan was put into action. Imagine the scene. The cell block is quiet, the lights low. Guards make their rounds, glancing into cells where men appear to be sleeping soundly. But in 3 of those cells, the sleeping men are nothing more than decoys. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers slip through the holes at the back of their cells into the dark utility corridor. They climb the pipes upward, reaching the roof space above the cell block, crawling through dust and shadows. With stolen tools, they pry loose a vent, emerging onto the prison's roof. The night air is cool, the fog drifting in from the bay. They move silently across the roof, then down a drain pipe onto the ground near the shoreline. There, hidden away from view, they inflate their raft. The raincoats glisten in the dim light. Strange but sturdy. The sound of air rushing in is muffled. The water before them is black, restless, churning with cold currents. And yet they step in. With their makeshift paddles, they push away from the island. The outline of Alcatraz recedes behind them, the guard towers standing silent against the night sky. Ahead lies the vast uncertainty of the bay, and perhaps freedom. By morning, the cells are discovered empty. The alarm is raised. Guards rush to the shoreline. Searchlights sweep the water. Boats are dispatched, but the men are gone. No bodies are found. No trace of the raft. No definitive answer. For the first time in its history, Alcatraz had been breached. The official record declared them missing, presumed drowned. The waters, authorities said, were too cold, the currents too strong. Survival, they believed, was impossible. And yet, no evidence ever surfaced. No bodies washed ashore. No raft fragments floated into the bay. Nothing. And so the mystery began. The morning after the escape, Alcatraz stirred into chaos. Guards rushed from one end of the prison to the other, checking every corner, every possible hiding place. Sirens echoed across the bay. Searchlights swept the waters, even in daylight, probing for clues. Yet there was nothing. The holes in the cells were real. The dummy heads were left behind. The workshop above the cell block was discovered, littered with tools, patches of raincoat, and evidence of patient craft. And yet, of the men themselves, there was no sign. The official conclusion came quickly. The waters of the San Francisco Bay, cold and swift, must have claimed them. Authorities declared them drowned. Their bodies carried out into the Pacific Ocean. And yet, for all the confidence of that declaration, one troubling fact remained. Not a single body was recovered. Alcatraz escapes in earlier years had ended differently. Bodies had washed ashore. Prisoners had been found clinging to driftwood. Evidence had been discovered floating in the currents. But in this case, this absence is what gave life to the mystery. The waters themselves are worth imagining. Cold. Always cold. Even in summer. In June, the temperature hovers in the low 50s Fahrenheit. 10 minutes in such water numbs the body. 30 minutes weakens the strongest swimmer. The currents, too, are deceptive. They shift with the tides, pulling outward toward the vastness of the ocean. And yet, two men like John and Clarence Anglin raised swimming in rivers and lakes. Water was not an enemy. It was familiar. They were strong, enduring swimmers. Their raft, stitched from dozens of raincoats, might have held. Some say the timing was crucial. That night, the tide was turning inward toward the city, not outward to the sea. If they launched at the right moment, the current may have carried them, not away, but toward the shore. But did they reach it? That is the question. In the years that followed, whispers began. A family friend of the Anglins claimed to have seen the brothers alive long after the escape. A photograph emerged from Brazil showing two men, older, weathered, but bearing a striking resemblance to John and Clarence. Some investigators declared the photo genuine. Others dismissed it. Letters appeared, allegedly written by one of the brothers. In one, the writer claimed to be alive, in hiding, tired of running. The handwriting was studied, but never conclusively verified. Even the FBI decades later admitted to uncertainty. The official stance remained, presumed drowned. Yet files kept open for years suggested something less absolute. The mystery deepened as Alcatraz itself closed. In 1963, just a year after the escape, the prison was shut down. Too costly, too deteriorated, too symbolic of a fading era. The rock, once feared, became a relic. Tourists began to visit, and there, in the cell block, they could see the very places where Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had chipped through the walls. They could gaze at the dummy heads, frozen in glass cases, eerie in their lifelike stillness. They could walk the corridors and wonder, did the men who once lived here succeed in their impossible dream? The escape-inspired films, most famously Escape from Alcatraz with Clint Eastwood. It inspired books, endless articles, and speculation that continues today. Each time the story is told, it is told with the same refrain. Perhaps they drowned, perhaps they lived. There is comfort, strangely, in not knowing. Mysteries such as this linger not because of evidence, but because of the absence of it. In the silence, in the unanswered question, the imagination finds room to wander. And so, the Alcatraz escape has become more than an event in history. It has become a legend, a story that blends fact and possibility, woven into the cultural fabric of America. If you visit Alcatraz today, you can stand in front of cell 138 or cell 152 pier at the small opening carved at the back. And imagine the sound of scraping spoons, the quiet whisper of men conspiring in the night. You can look across the bay to the city glimmering in the distance, and wonder if, on that dark night in June of 1962, 3 men truly reached it. The rock stands silent now, but the mystery endures. Imagine Alcatraz not only as a prison, but as a neighborhood. For many, this is the most surprising truth about the island. Just a short walk from the cell blocks, where men endured the monotony of confinement. There were small houses, neat gardens, and laughter carried on the wind. Here, the prison guards and their families lived ordinary lives. Children grew up on the rock. They rode bicycles along narrow paths overlooking the sea. They played games on grassy patches within sight of guard towers. They woke each morning to the same sound of foghorns and waves that the prisoners heard from their cells but for them. Those sounds were part of home. In these white-painted houses, wives tended kitchens and raised children. Grocery deliveries arrived by boat from the mainland, carrying fresh bread, milk, and vegetables. Families would gather for dinners together, perhaps with the faint echo of a cell block bell drifting across the island. The contrast could not have been sharper. For the prisoners, daily life was a rigid rhythm of commands. Rise at the clang of the bell, eat under watchful eyes, labor, wait, endure. For the families, life was familiar, patterned by school lessons, church gatherings, and birthday celebrations. Imagine a guard finishing a long shift in this. He locks his keys away, removes his uniform cap, and within minutes he is at home, greeted by his children, perhaps sitting at a dinner table with the smell of roast meat or stew in the air. Just across the way, men in denim uniforms sit in narrow cells, staring at barred windows, longing for even a fraction of such warmth. Some children later recalled their unusual childhood fondly. To them, Alcatraz was a safe and quiet place. There were no cars, no city dangers, only the sea, the gulls, and the company of other children on the island. They understood, vaguely, that dangerous men were kept below, but the prison was not their world. Their world was one of school books, hopscotch, and ferry rides to San Francisco for outings. To the inmates, however, the sight of these homes and gardens must have been a quiet torment. From certain angles in the yard, they could glimpse the houses where families lived freely. At night, faint music or laughter might drift across the grounds. The contrast was a constant reminder. On one side of the fence, freedom and love. On the other, confinement and silence. Even the geography of the island reinforced this division. The prison sat at the top of the rock, stern and commanding, surrounded by fences and floodlights. Below, nearer the shore, the family homes nestled with a kind of gentleness, soft by trees and flowers planted by the residents themselves. Two worlds, sharing the same space, yet forever apart. When the prison closed in 1963, the families left. Their houses, once full of life, became empty shells. Today, some of those structures remain, weathered by salt and wind, their windows broken, their walls crumbling. Visitors can walk among them and imagine the laughter of children echoing against the stone, now replaced by the cries of gulls. This contrasts the hard discipline of prison life against the softness of family life was perhaps the truest reflection of Alcatraz. It was never only a fortress. It was also a village. It was not only a place of despair, but also a place of picnics, school days, and quiet domestic routines. Side by side, two worlds existed, reminding us that history is never singular. It is always layered, always containing multitudes. Closing reflection, gentle farewell now. As our journey comes to its end, let the image of the island settle softly in your mind. The rock, surrounded by dark waters, its cliffs worn by waves, its buildings standing weathered and silent. Think of the men who endured its cells, the monotony, the strict order, and the constant reminder of the freedom they had lost. Think, too, of the three who dared to slip away into the night, leaving behind a mystery that still lingers in the mist. And then, remember the children who once played there, the families who called it home, the laughter and light that softened the edges of such a hard place. Today, Alcatraz is empty. Its cells no longer confine. Its halls echo only with the steps of visitors. Seabirds circle where once searchlights swept. Time itself has softened the edges of its story. As you drift into sleep, take comfort in the quiet of the present. The rock is only memory now. Its walls hold no one. Its mysteries rest gently in history, unanswered yet endlessly fascinating. Let the sound of the sea in your imagination carry you. The waves, steady and eternal, lap against the shore. The distant lights of San Francisco shimmered across the water. And you, safe and warm, can let go, letting the past fade like mist on the bay. Rest well. Good night,